Hey, how's it going, everyone? Just want to do a quick lesson, just some stories, I guess, from when I was growing up. I just kind of thought about this sort of randomly earlier and figured make a video on it. Want to talk about Matthew 23, verse 9, which is just an incredible verse in the Bible. The entire book of Matthew is incredible to me, but this verse is also very, very powerful. And it says, "And call no man your father upon the earth, for one is your Father which is in heaven." This is Jesus again, constantly deflecting attention away from himself, even though he's very worthy of it, unto God, to the Father, to heaven, the kingdom of heaven, the spirit world, always with everything that came out of his mouth. He is not really capable of saying anything excessively earthly, and so this is also a very, very powerful statement and recommendation, and acknowledgement. And just to be able to honor Jesus in this verse requires a tremendous amount of faith, because we would have to believe then that there is a Father and there is a heaven, and then that's where he resides. And he stands alone, that there is only one. And Jesus literally says that, "For one is your Father which is in heaven." In my opinion, those who do what he says here in this theologically loaded statement, exclusive worship, "For one is your Father," and acknowledge that there is a heaven, and to not give that attention and focus and that name, that designation to anyone here on earth is not for very many people, And so this is an incredibly powerful statement, and I would say a very, very wise thing to at least consider, especially in the days that we live in. But I want to talk about something just in my childhood that I felt very self-conscious about growing up, because it's not to throw my dad under the bus. Like, he's not a mean-spirited person by any means, not abusive or anything. He's very, of anything, kind of too passive, almost too nice kind of thing. But he's not a truther or into spirituality. I did thought it was interesting growing up that he used to watch Billy Graham sermons quite often when he would have those crusades, in the football stadiums, baseball stadiums. And then later, if there's any time I noticed later in life, even in the last while, he would still watch them, but if his mom, my grandmother, was around, he would hide it. And this is incredible that a grown man would do that. And it's convicting to myself, because there are times that I quote unquote hide God from other people. So I'm not, again, saying this in a negative way, but he does have sort of, I would say, a spiritual sort of disposition, but he's not out, in the open about it, which I think to me fundamentally has to be kind of all people. Even if people are evil to the core, they still have to wonder why sometimes, why they're doing it and what's the purpose of all this. They can get tired of this life just like anybody else. And so, he does, I would say, for sure have an introspective side. But the thing I wanted to talk about is just his, I would say, inability to parent. And it's, again, I resonate with him in the sense that if I were to have kids, I would probably be in a similar position. But he just was not into parenting. He just was. And it's something that, Indian people do when they reach a certain age. And then so he just had, kids. And I'm not saying he doesn't care about us or anything. I'm talking about the active day-to-day parenting. Certain people want it, and are good at it, and actively are kind of proactive and seeking after ways that they can, support and, foster the development of their kids. And then there are others who just don't, they're just not into that, and they're not bad people. But the one analogy I want to use is he would rarely kind of, if he was not able to because of his job was demanding, and he was working for his brother-in-law for half of his career, which once you have family and business intermingled, it gets very tense, and sometimes even harder to work for somebody within your own family circle. And so his work was always on his mind. So he would not very often be able to drive me around, because I was into a lot of sports and doing a lot of stuff, and I couldn't drive, and all that, and we only had one car and stuff like that. So it was just a very sort of I was just very self-conscious about this growing up, where I always felt amongst my friends whose parents would, most of them, not all of them, but would, pick them up, know that that's part of the obligation to, like, your kids, is to, like, get them to different sporting events and stuff like that. And so, there are times that I just didn't go to events, just because I didn't have a way to get there. And I remember one instance specifically, I was like, finished hockey, and my dad left during the event. I think it might have been a practice, and then he just went to his work, and then just mistimed it. And then so, like, he came back, like, later. And so, like, I didn't know where my dad was, and I was a young kid, like, maybe, like, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 or something like that. And I come back, and, like, out of the locker room, and my dad's not there. So I just started walking home. And, like, my dad literally drove past me while I was, like, walking with all my hockey equipment. And I just thought my dad, like, left me, and stuff. So this is, like, funny looking back, but, like, in that time I was, like, distraught. I was like, whoa, like, what's going on? And so, again, I'm not saying this to throw my dad under the bus. I'm just saying this is the world that we live in. And I want to make, again, a spiritual analogy using Matthew 23, verse 9, that there is our Father for those who choose to obey Jesus in these very profound words that he says here. We do have only one Father, and he's in heaven. And he is not, as much as it seems like that, he is not like our earthly parents, not even on his worst day. And so this is, again, very convicting to myself, because I know for sure if I was a parent, I wouldn't probably be a good one. I see, like, parents with their kids, sometimes the kids will come to the golf course with them. I'm like, I could not be around kids on a golf course. First, it wouldn't be good for them because they would hear things that they shouldn't hear. But I just know that I'm not patient enough, to be a good parent at all. And so, I'm not going down that route, and I don't plan on it. But, so this is not a shot to him, but just, again, to contrast just my own, earthly experience with my dad versus what Jesus says here is our Heavenly Father. And so I just want us to, not use the actions of other people to immediately give God those attributes, because oftentimes it's the complete opposite. And so, Jesus even says that if our earthly parents know how to give good gifts, even if my dad would once in a while, cater to my needs and stuff like that, God and our Father in heaven is infinitely more inclined, to good works. So the thing that we have to acknowledge, though, I would say, to caveat this, is that when we interact with our parents here on earth, we have to, like, make sure they have time. Just my dad didn't have very much time. He was just a very sort of anxiety prone person, and I think that that's something that I've witnessed, and I think it kind of makes us sort of like that. And I just took everything seriously, growing up, like, way too much. And so the foot's completely off the gas, but we learn from our parents, for better or for worse. And so he's not like a malicious person, is what I'm trying to say. But even our parents, our earthly parents, even the ones who are not totally into parenting, full time, hands on the wheel type thing, they're capable of giving good gifts. And so the Bible says that our Father in heaven is infinitely more inclined to that, because he's not evil, like our parents. And so now we would have to look around and wonder, like, well, how could that be, with all the goings on of the world right now, where God is nowhere to be found. And so I just want people, and I've done a video on prayer and, like, the prerequisites for praying to God, and I'm not even stating that I've had these sort of magical experiences and stuff, but just reading just common sense from the Bible, and really in many ways why God is removed from, the goings on of the world right now, is for us to ask our parents. We need to make sure they have time, that they can fit us in, and all that kind of stuff. It's the sort of reciprocal with God. God has infinite time, and he has less. That is not a restriction or an inhibitor in any way in accessing God. Is his effort, and his time, quote unquote time, because he lives, like Jesus says, here in heaven, which is outside of time. But he has requirements, for us to be able to ask God for a quote unquote ride, and ask God for anything. And even to sort of put it in this end times framework, these UFOs are God's quote vehicles, and so these chariots, these clouds. And so for all of us, anybody who has the boldness, and I would say the wisdom, to ask God for a quote unquote ride, for a lift, literally up out of here, and spiritually elevate ourselves and literally remove, ourselves from this enclosed system, God has requirements. And, I just don't think very many people are interested in meeting those requirements before they, access God and quote, ask him for a lift. But it's important to know that they're there. So he's not time bound or resource bound like our parents are. And he doesn't, have anxiety and all that kind of stuff, and he's got all that stuff covered, but he does look at the way that we live, and the way that we operate amongst the people around us. And those are the things that he will use to decide whether we're worthy to get a lift, from him. And I don't say this in any kind of way that I figured it out, but just it's very important to know this, that God is not some cosmic slot machine that, can be accessed in many ways like our parents can be, and so he is able to do all these things, and it's very trivial for him. And but he requires us to care for other people, be forgiving and charitable, and be humble, before he's able to acknowledge anything, even for us to be able to call him our Father, which Jesus tells us to, in many ways as a command, in Matthew 23, verse 9. And so, I think that for all the people out there who are actually parents, I think that it's a good thing, in my opinion, to I know it's a very high standard to put ourselves up against God, but it's never a bad thing, because in my opinion, it actually should make parenting much, much easier, because you always know that, you'll never live up to God's expectations, but at the same time, you'll also know that your kid's father is not you. I think that's the most relief that I think people should get. And, all the people in the Old Testament knew this, when Abraham was asked to sacrifice his child, he knew that his child was not his own. And so this is Abraham taking his child Isaac on the request of God to be sacrificed. Abraham knew that this is not his child, and I know that that's not what this world teaches, because again, God is removed from every aspect of our lives. But everything that's here, this table, my phone, everything that exists is God's. He made it. It's his idea. Whether he actually came and physically made it, or the elements that we use to make it are his, and all the people that can construct these things was his idea. And so the relief that I feel that people who are parents, who read the Bible and have an understanding of it, and can receive the good and the bad, is know that we'll always be, we'll always pale in comparison to God in heaven. But then at the same time, we'll know that everything that we do should be to direct people towards their true Father, which is in heaven. And so this is an amazing thing. I think that, I find it interesting that, my dad was sort of drawn to these things, throughout his life. And, he just wouldn't take it any further and ask any questions more, because the implications for it are huge, in a person's life, especially if you're in a Hindu sort of family and a network. And I don't say this in any kind of way that I'm special, but I would say for those out there who have sacrificed, family and friends and all that kind of stuff, rejoice, because if what Jesus says is true, that our one Father is in heaven, and he's in a place that is written of in many, many places in the Bible as being paradise, and filled with his glory, that's the only thing that matters. It doesn't, our earthly parents are just that. They're our earthly parents, and they're here, in my opinion, just to, the good ones, to direct us towards God. And if they don't, then we learn about God through contrast, and that's not to throw parents under the bus, but there's only two options, and Jesus makes it very clear here that, for one is your Father, and he's in heaven. Hope everyone's doing well. Bye.